The search for Sergeant Ellie Vance in the days, weeks, and months that followed was one of the largest, most intensive, and ultimately most frustrating in the long history of the Greater Manchester Police. The Blackwood Mill, a place that had once hummed with the deafening, life-affirming roar of thousands of looms and the chatter of countless workers, steadfastly, stubbornly, almost maliciously refused to give up its dark secrets. Every dusty, cavernous floor, every small, forgotten foreman's office with its peeling paint and scattered, decades-old paperwork, every treacherous, gaping hole in the rotting wooden floorboards where massive, heavy machinery had once stood, was meticulously, repeatedly searched by hundreds of officers. Search dogs were brought in, their eager whining echoing in the vast, empty spaces, but they all lost Ellie's scent just a few feet inside the door where her flashlight had been found, whining and backtracking in confusion. The investigation in 1977 was exhaustive, all-consuming, but ultimately maddeningly baffling. There were no signs of a struggle, no bloodstains revealed by the forensic technology of the day, no witnesses in the deserted industrial area who had seen or heard anything unusual. The mysterious, technically impossible phone call that had lured her there could not be traced to any physical source. It was a ghost in the machine, a voice from nowhere. It was as if the massive, brooding brick building had simply, inexplicably swallowed one of their own. A dedicated and respected officer, whole and without a trace. The emotional toll on those she left behind was immense and devastating. Her younger brother, Liam, a bright university student studying architecture at the time, saw his ordered, promising world completely collapse. He dropped out of his course, unable to focus, his days consumed by a desperate, almost obsessive need to find his sister. He spent months, which turned into years, pasting missing posters bearing Ellie's smiling, confident police photograph all over the city. His hopes slowly, painfully eroding with each passing season. Each fruitless lead, each well-meaning but empty platitude from the authorities, until all that remained was a quiet, gnawing, permanent despair. He eventually returned to his studies, but the bright spark of his youth had been extinguished, replaced by a permanent, weary sadness. For Frank Miller, her partner, the guilt was a relentless, insidious torment that defined the rest of his career. He replayed their last conversation, their last shared joke, their last radio exchange over and over in his mind. His thoughts snagged on the endless, torturous loop of what-ifs. What if he had been more insistent on going with her? What if he had recognized the jeweler's call as a likely false alarm, a common occurrence, and stayed with her to investigate the far more unusual call at the mill? The case became his personal, professional obsession, a ghost that haunted his every waking moment and infiltrated his dreams. He would, on his days off, return to the looming, silent mill, walking its perimeter, staring up at its dark, empty windows as if expecting Ellie to simply walk out and chide him for worrying. His obsession, while hindering his personal life, ironically fueled his career. He threw himself into his work with a ferocious, almost punishing dedication, becoming known as a dogged, brilliant detective, and slowly, steadily rose through the ranks of the force, the unsolved mystery of his lost partner, a constant driving force at his back. As the years passed with agonizing slowness, the city of Manchester itself changed dramatically. The old soot-stained industrial behemoths of its past were either torn down with explosive finality to make way for sleek modern glass and steel structures, or were left to crumble further into picturesque, romantic ruin. The Blackwood Mill, however, remained, its fate tied up in legal disputes and a lack of investor interest. It stood dark, silent, and imposing, a monument to a bygone, grittier era, and the city's most enduring, painful, and publicly known police mystery. The official police investigation went cold, the voluminous, inches-thick case file filled with dead ends and unanswered questions. Eventually relegated to the dusty, climate-controlled archives, a testament to a complete, baffling, and deeply embarrassing dead end. For 11 long, silent, empty years, the disappearance of Sergeant Eleanor Vance was a deep, unhealed wound for the Greater Manchester Police, a story told in hushed tones to impressionable rookies to instill a healthy sense of caution and a respect for the unknown, a chilling, ever-present reminder that some questions, it seemed, were destined to remain forever, frustratingly, tragically unanswered. In the crisp, damp autumn of 1988, precisely 11 years after Woman Police Sergeant Ellie Vance had vanished into its dark, cavernous interior, the final death knell finally irrevocably sounded for the Blackwood Mill. The sprawling derelict property, long considered a dangerous eyesore and a symbol of urban decay, was at last purchased by a large, aggressive development corporation with ambitious multi-million-pound plus. Their vision was to demolish the old historic structure entirely and erect a modern, state-of-the-art glass and steel office complex, a gleaming symbol of Manchester's confident march into a post-industrial future. The once mighty beating heart of Manchester's proud industrial past was to be torn down, its millions of historic bricks and massive iron support beams carted away like so much common, worthless rubble. During the initial painstaking phase of the demolition, the soft strip, a process where internal non-structural elements such as wiring, plumbing, and non-load-bearing walls are carefully removed before the heavy wrecking machinery moves in. A small crew of demolition workers tasked with clearing the vast fourth floor made a bizarre, almost unbelievable discovery. While tearing down a long, unremarkable interior brick wall that didn't appear on any of the building's original century-old architectural blueprints, they found that it was not a single wall but two, with a narrow, dark void between them. Intrigued, they broke through the second inner wall and found themselves staring into a small, windowless, completely hidden, lead-lined room. It was clearly some sort of high-security office, vault, or perhaps even a shielded laboratory left over from a long-defunct, possibly secret tenant that had once occupied a small, self-contained section of the mill decades ago, its existence entirely unknown and unrecorded. Inside the dusty, almost hermetically sealed room, which had the unnerving, preserved stillness of a pharaoh's tomb, sat a single heavy metal desk, a rusted swivel chair, and a piece of electronic technology that seemed like an ancient, almost alien relic even in the rapidly advancing technological landscape of 1988. A massive, cumbersome, industrial-grade reel-to-reel video recording system, its thick, heavy-duty casing suggesting it was built for durability and continuous operation. Connected to it by thick, heavily shielded industrial-strength cables was a single large, black-and-white fixed-position surveillance camera, which the workers found still mounted high on the wall of the main spinning floor. Its lens aimed down a long, central corridor, its presence having been dismissed by everyone over the years as just another piece of defunct, meaningless factory hardware. More remarkably, a single thick 2-inch magnetic tape was still carefully, correctly spooled in the massive recording machine, seemingly waiting patiently in the darkness. Intrigued by the sheer strangeness of the find, and legally obligated by company policy to report any unusual discoveries, the construction foreman, a pragmatic man named Davies, called the police. The discovery of any hidden room in the infamous, almost legendary Blackwood Mill was enough to pique significant interest at the Newton Street station. But the specific mention of old, high-security recording equipment immediately elevated the call's priority to the highest level. The news quickly, urgently made its way up the chain of command, landing with the stunning, almost physical force of a body blow on the desk of Detective Inspector Frank Miller. Now in his late 40s, a seasoned, world-weary, and highly respected detective, but still privately haunted by the ghost of his lost partner, Frank had never truly let go of the Vance case. The unexpected discovery after 11 years of absolute soul-crushing silence tore open the old, deep wound, flooding him with a chaotic, dizzying mixture of profound, almost unbearable dread and a wild, irrational, almost dangerous flicker of renewed hope. He immediately, without hesitation, drove to the scene, his heart pounding with an intensity he hadn't felt in years. Standing in the dusty, time capsule-like hidden room, staring at the archaic, almost steampunk recording machine, Frank Miller felt the past and present collide with a dizzying, sickening force. It was a long shot, a near statistical impossibility, but the date, neatly, precisely scrawled in black ink on the tape's paper label, was 17/11/77, the exact date of Ellie's disappearance. The city's forensics lab was immediately tasked with the delicate, uncertain, almost alchemical job of trying to retrieve a stable, viewable image from the 11-year-old obsolete and potentially degraded magnetic tape. The entire police department, from the chief constable down to the newest rookie, seemed to hold its collective, hopeful, fearful breath. The police technicians at the cutting edge for 1988 forensics lab worked for 2 long, painstaking days. The task was monumental. The delicate magnetic tape had to be carefully cleaned of 11 years of microscopic dust, its brittle, aging surface treated to prevent it from snapping. They had to source from a retired broadcast engineer's private collection, one of the few remaining functional reel-to-reel video players of that specific obscure industrial model. The process was a nerve-wracking blend of modern forensic science and almost archaic technological archaeology. Finally, on the 3rd day, they were ready. Detective Inspector Frank Miller, his face a grim, unreadable mask, along with the now 30-year-old Liam Vance, whom Frank had called as soon as the tape was confirmed to be from that fateful night, sat together in a small, dark, soundproofed viewing room. Liam, an architect now himself, his youthful face having settled into a permanent expression of quiet, weary sadness, was pale. His hands clenched so tightly in his lap that his knuckles were white. The air in the room was thick with unspoken hope and a terrible, suffocating dread. With a series of loud, mechanical clicks and a low, resonant whir from the massive tape machine, an image flickered to life on the small, high-resolution monitor. It was grainy, stark, almost beautiful in its brutalist black and white simplicity. A silent, fixed, unblinking perspective from a high vantage point on the 4th-floor wall of the desolate Blackwood Mill. The vast, cavernous room below was empty, filled with the ghostly skeletal silhouettes of the long, dormant looms and spinning mules, their silent forms draped in thick, shroud-like layers of dust, illuminated only by the powerful, intrusive, sweeping beam of a single bright flashlight. Then a figure entered the frame from the far left of the screen, walking into the cone of her own light. It was her, Sergeant Eleanor Vance, 11 years younger, her purposeful, confident stride, her familiar silhouette, unmistakable even in the low-quality, ghostly footage. She was alive. Frank felt a raw, painful lump form in his throat. Beside him, Liam let out a soft, choked gasp. The silent, spectral film played out like a ghostly, deeply unsettling pantomime. Ellie moved cautiously but with an undeniable professional confidence through the massive, derelict industrial space. She seemed to be following something. Or perhaps, Frank thought, listening to something that the silent recording could not possibly capture. Her head would tilt slightly, almost bird-like, as if she were straining to hear a distant, elusive sound that only she was privy to. A sound that had drawn her deeper and deeper into the belly of the decaying beast. She didn't appear frightened or panicked, but rather intensely, almost preternaturally focused, fully alert, every line of her body communicating a state of heightened professional readiness. She methodically swept her powerful flashlight beam over the sentient, rusted looms and massive spinning mules, her breath visible as faint ethereal plumes in the cold, damp air. She was a solitary, determined figure of order in a vast landscape of chaos and decay. Then came the moment, the final, inexplicable sequence that made the breath catch and freeze in both Frank's and Liam's throats. Ellie, having completed her sweep of the main floor, walked purposefully, without hesitation, down a long central corridor formed by two towering rows of silent machinery. The camera's fixed, high-angle perspective captured her entire, uninterrupted journey down this industrial canyon. She approached a specific, entirely unremarkable solid brick wall at the far end of the long corridor. A wall that, on all the original architectural blueprints and during all the exhaustive previous police searches, was simply the end of the line, the building's solid, windowless northern exterior wall. There was no door, no window, no visible archway or exit of any kind. She didn't slow her pace, she didn't raise a hand to knock or test the surface. She walked directly, deliberately towards the solid brick wall, her flashlight beam fixed straight ahead, illuminating the rough, grimy texture of the bricks. Just as her figure was about to make physical contact with the solid, unyielding wall, the image on the screen erupted. It didn't just cut out or go to black. It dissolved in a single, violent, chaotic frame into a blinding, deafening blast of white noise, a screaming digital snowstorm of pure, raw static that filled the monitor with its silent, shrieking chaos. The tape continued to run for several more minutes, but the screen remained a roiling, meaningless sea of static. They rewound the fragile tape and played the sequence again, and again, and again. The result was always precisely, maddeningly the same. Sergeant Eleanor Vance, a living, breathing, solid police officer, walked calmly and deliberately towards a solid brick wall, and then, at the precise, impossibly logic-defying moment of expected impact, she and the video signal itself simply, utterly, and inexplicably ceased to exist. The impossible, ghostly footage, evidence that defied all known laws of physics and rational explanation, gave Detective Inspector Frank Miller something he hadn't possessed for 11 long, agonizing years. A specific, tangible, albeit utterly baffling destination. Armed with this inexplicable spectral clue, he immediately assembled a team, including several members of the forensics unit and a skeptical but intrigued structural engineer from the city planning department. He called Liam Vance again. "We're going back to the mill," Frank said, his voice low and tight with an emotion Liam couldn't quite decipher. "We're going to that wall." Liam, his face pale but his eyes burning with a desperate, almost feverish intensity, insisted on accompanying them, a request Frank, looking at the man whose life had been so profoundly defined by this mystery, could not bring himself to refuse. They arrived at the now active demolition site of the Blackwood Mill, the air thick with brick dust and the noise of heavy machinery. They found the exact corridor from the footage on the 4th floor, the space now stripped of its ghostly machinery, feeling even more cavernous, desolate, and resonant with history. The brick wall at the end of the corridor was just as it had appeared in the silent black and white video. Solid, unremarkable, covered in the accumulated grime and damp of decades, showing no visible signs of a door, a hidden seam, or any kind of subsequent repair or alteration. It was, to all appearances, just a wall. The demolition foreman, a burly, pragmatic man named Davies with little time for what he considered police flights of fancy, argued vehemently against damaging what he insisted was a primary load-bearing structural wall based on a glitchy old video. But Frank Miller, his voice carrying the immense, unyielding weight of an 11-year obsession, was resolute, his gaze fixed on the grimy bricks. "Take it down," he ordered the foreman, his voice quiet but absolute. "I don't care what your blueprints say, take it down. Brick by single brick if you have to." Under the harsh, unforgiving glare of portable high-intensity work lights, a small crew of demolition workers, their skepticism slowly giving way to a shared sense of tense anticipation, began the arduous, noisy task of breaking through the wall. The first few layers of thick Victorian-era brick and hard, crumbling mortar were solid, just as the blueprints and the engineer had predicted. The sound of sledgehammers striking brick echoed loudly in the cavernous, empty space. But then, after they had removed about 2 feet of solid brickwork, a sledgehammer, wielded by the foreman himself, broke through into empty, dark space with a sudden, hollow thud. A collective gasp went through the assembled, dust-covered group. There was something, a void behind the wall. Carefully, almost reverently now, the workers enlarged the opening, pulling away bricks by hand. Behind the thick, solid brick wall was a small, forgotten, completely sealed-off space, no more than 6 feet by 6 feet. It wasn't on any blueprint because it wasn't a room. It was, the structural engineer surmised with a look of dawning comprehension, an old, long obsolete service shaft, or perhaps a small freight elevator hoistway that had been rendered useless and had been completely seamlessly bricked up and sealed over decades ago, perhaps even during the mill's last operational phase in the 1950s. The air that wafted out from the newly created opening was stale, cold, and utterly devoid of life, the smell of dust and time itself. A forensics officer aimed a powerful high-lumen torch into the oppressive, undisturbed darkness. And there, slumped in a seated position against the far interior wall, was what remained of Sergeant Eleanor Vance. Her skeletal remains, remarkably preserved in the dry, sealed environment, were still clothed in the tattered, decayed remnants of her 1977 police uniform, the silver buttons on her tunic tarnished but intact. Her duty belt, with her empty, worn leather holster, her keys, and her police-issue radio lay on the dusty floor beside her, exactly where it must have fallen from her long, disintegrated belt. There were no obvious, discernible signs of a struggle within the tiny, confined space, no bullet holes in the remnants of her uniform, no clear, traumatic evidence of violence on the bones themselves. It was as if she had simply walked into this small, dark, forgotten space, sat down, and the wall had been silently, impossibly bricked up behind her, sealing her off from the world. The discovery answered the agonizing central question of where Ellie Vance had been for 11 long, torturous years. But it opened up a terrifying, yawning chasm of new, even more baffling, almost supernatural questions. How did she get into a completely sealed-off, bricked-up shaft? Who or what made the mysterious, technically impossible phone call that had so precisely, so effectively lured her to that exact spot in the colossal, sprawling mill? Who operated the secret hidden camera, a piece of high-end surveillance technology that was almost unheard of for a private entity in 1977? And why did the tape end so violently, so inexplicably at that critical moment? The chilling evidence of her final resting place provided no logical, rational answers to any of these questions. She was found, but the fundamental truth of her disappearance remained locked away, as sealed and as silent as the brick tomb she had occupied for over a decade. The ghost in the machine had, against all odds, pointed the way to her body, but her final terrifying moments and the true nature of the impossible, logic-defying events at the Blackwood Mill on that cold, fateful November night remained an unsettling, profound, and perhaps forever an inexplicable, haunting mystery. Frank Miller had finally found his lost partner, but he knew with a heavy, sorrowful, and deeply unsatisfying certainty that he would never truly find the answers he and a now silently weeping Liam Vance so desperately, so profoundly needed.